Hi, and welcome to the Long Road Home. We're going to be looking at a passage from Hosea today, specifically Hosea 6, verse 6. That would be, "For the Lord," for Yahweh, "desires steadfast love rather than sacrifice, and the knowledge of God rather than burnt offerings." Now it starts with the word "for," which means we need to look back to the previous verse. But before we do that, I do want to say a brief something about who Hosea was. Hosea was a prophet during the time of King Hezekiah and Uzziah, and essentially he was alive at the same time as the prophet Isaiah, the prophet where we get the beautiful passage on the holiness of God in Isaiah 6, and the passage foretelling Christ that some, like John MacArthur, referred to as the first gospel, Isaiah 53. So this was a contemporary of Isaiah. They might have even known each other. But the ministry of Hosea was not to the kingdom of Judah, which was Isaiah's ministry. Rather, his was to the kingdom of Israel, which was on the brink of exile. So, Hosea is, I believe, and I could be mistaken here, the last prophet sent to Israel before they were sent to exile. And his is a prophet with a harsh picture and a very tender offer of God's love. So the harsh picture, Hosea actually lives out, and he is told by God to marry a prostitute and have children with her, and to raise children that are not his. They're referred to as children of whoredom, children of fornication, children of adultery in this case. So he marries a prostitute, and she continues to be a prostitute. She continues to live the way she lived before he married her. And from chapters 1 to 3, he is essentially raising children that are not his own, and then going to the whorehouse where she is, or going to the house where she is living or staying with someone who is not him, and purchasing her back, literally buying her for her price and saying, "You're going to stay at home from now on," or "You're going to stay at home for a while because I paid your price." And this is a picture, a very painful picture. If anyone's ever been through infidelity, or if they've ever been cheated on by a girlfriend or boyfriend or a husband or wife, it can be one of the most painful and not just disheartening, but devaluing experiences. It lowers your value of yourself when it happens. And when you go through that, be it just an old girlfriend or old boyfriend, the scars of distrust linger long. And I mean, the way the world is, this happens in high school all the time. And so I'm sure everyone has some sort of memory of someone betraying them. And they can really relate to Hosea. Well, Hosea was a picture of what God had gone through by rescuing Israel out of Egypt, by redeeming her, taking her as if the nation Israel were his bride, and then to have her seek after false gods, to neglect his sacrifices and feasts, or worse still, to continue the sacrifices and feasts as if they were loyal to him, while also seeking out other gods that were no gods. Seeking out, the kingdom of Israel, the first king of Israel, not the first king of the united Israel, but when Israel and Judah split, the first king erected high places for them to go and worship golden calves like they had in the wilderness, because he was afraid that they would go back to their original country. And he set this horrible downward spiral of Israel that they never recovered from. And prophet after prophet was sent, and finally Hosea comes, and he's God's last warning, and then a promise of redemption. And when Hosea goes and purchases his wife back to himself, that is God's redemption. That is God saying, I don't owe this to you. I should divorce you. I have banished you, outcast you. You are no longer in the land of Israel, and I will reclaim you and redeem you and bring you home. And in the time of Jesus, the Samaritans at the time were Israelites that returned to the land, and people that had moved in the time the Israelites were gone, they had intermarried. And so the Jews from Judah, that's where you get the word Jews, it's from Judah, didn't like the Samaritans very much because they had intermarried, and they had mixed in their own culture with the practice of Judaism, and they corrupted the religion. But so had Judaism at that time, so it was bad on both sides. But with Hosea, this passage is coming from a heart of love, because the word that I translated, that I used the phrase steadfast love, that's the phrase found in the ESV. In the NASB, it's faithfulness or loyalty. Well, the word is almost untranslatable. The word is hesed or chesed, sometimes pronounced chesed by other people. And it means steadfast love, covenant love, unfailing love, loving kindness, tender mercy. And it just encapsulates God's love for His covenant people. It's this idea that God loves us because He has loved us and He has chosen to love us, and He will never change in that. It is a faithful, unfailing, unending love, and He says He desires that kind of love. And it starts out with 4, which points back to the previous verse, which is a passage on judgment. It's a passage on God judging Israel, and He's saying He's judging them because they are not returning His love. And He even, in the verse before that, verse 4 of chapter 6, describes their love as being like a cloud or a mist that goes away early in the day when the day heats up. And so their love is fleeting and temporary and situational, and God's love is steadfast and unwavering. He says, I desire unwavering love from you, but you have only given me this natural, fake, kind of situational, conditional love, and yet God has lavished you with a nation, with all these other blessings, and you return Him with that? And He says, no, I'm going to send you out of the land because you were not faithful in your love for me. You were not steadfast and stalwart in your love for me. But here's this next part. He indicates that they have continued their sacrifices. They've continued their practices of following Him. He says He desires, and it says desires, not needs. He doesn't need anything. He's God, but He does require it of us. So He desires hesed or steadfast love rather than sacrifices. He would rather have love. He would rather have the steadfast, unwavering love of His people over the things He told them to do. He told them to give sacrifices. He told them to burn offerings. But yet they are not doing it with the right heart, and God desires the heart to be right far more than He desires the things we do to be right. Guys, this is to us today to say, God, how's that for an adventure? God would rather have us love Him than do stuff. And the doing stuff should come out of a heart for love for Him. Not we do stuff mechanically because we are robot Christians. No, it is we love God and therefore we serve Him in these ways. It's a service that comes from our love. And then this is actually a parallelism. A lot of prophecies were set to music. There was even a passage that says, bring me my lyre that I might prophecy. And so it's written in Hebrew poetry. And Hebrew poetry uses parallelisms. And so the parallelism here is restating itself. And when it resets restates steadfast love, it uses the word knowledge of God. Knowledge of God as the parallel to steadfast love. And so it shows us that when God says he knows us, or he wants us to know something, he's talking about love. And he's talking about an intimate relationship and knowing the person that you love on a close, personal, relational level. God is saying he desires relationship over burnt offerings, over works, over doing things. So he desires us to have a relationship with him, true saving faith in him, and to love him. And out of that love, out of that relationship, we will serve him. Okay? And so we see a great example also, I'm going to end on this, that the word knowledge, as used, for instance, foreknowledge, doesn't mean that he just knew something ahead of time. It means that he loved us ahead of time. So that's just a word about God's love for us on your long road home. God bless you.